First, I have to say thank you so much, Alan and Leela, for having me and also having all of us. This is definitely one of the most exciting panels I've ever been on, with so many people who have been influential in my work, in my life, my career. And I am just grateful for the context of this conversation. Um, I must be transparent that I am a member of MoMA's uh, trustee committee on education, and have considered myself a friend of Glenn and his daughter Alexis, who curated an exhibition of mine, uh, of my work, I think 6 or 7 years ago. So I'm biased. Pamela Joyner has been, I think, one of the most game-changing art collectors in this century. And Nicola has been one of my biggest advocates and supporters, and has also been an incredible game changer through her consulting and mentoring of artists. I have to say that I fundamentally disagree with the three museum directors, though. um, and I have to start with the background of my mother's MoMA membership card in 1979. I know for a fact if it weren't for that acceptance and the education that she got as a young African American woman artist, uh, that I wouldn't be here, and by default, we wouldn't be here. My mother was, her name is Willis. She's a curator, art historian who worked at Schomburg Center for Research in Art and Black Culture for uh, almost 2 decades, after which she worked at what was then called the African American Museum Project at the Smithsonian, which we now refer to as the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so I grew up actually in these institutions, um, actually in the archives, understanding the power of art to change and shape society. And I believe that all art is political. I don't believe it has to look political to be political. Ellsworth Kelly is a political artist in my position, and for my position. But I also had experiences uh, at the Met, where there was Kerry James Marshall's Mastery exhibition, which was groundbreaking and I would say earth shattering for the art world, but also especially the art market, which is highly political. When a Black artist who's living can sell a painting for over $20 million, that does reshape the way in which we understand the value of images of Black people and the work of Black artists. At the Museum of Fine Art, Boston, I got the privilege of seeing an exhibition by Gordon Parks called Back to Fort Scott, which was a very small but really profound exhibition for me, where I began to understand a different element of artists who I greatly respect work. And Of course, there's the Whitney's Black Male exhibition, which was curated by Thelma Golden, which was highly controversial at the time, but I think paved the way for so much of the work we see today. And when it comes bringing it back to MoMA, I had the privilege with my collaboration for freedoms in when was that, in 2017. In 2016 we put up this billboard in Mississippi that said "Make America Great Again," and it featured Spider Martin's photograph of John Lewis and Hosea Williams and many nonviolent civil rights activists. And we had the privilege of actually exhibiting that physical billboard in MoMA PS1, and speaking to, like, just a few months later, and collaborating with the community to actually have discourse about the current moment of change that was happening there. And one of the things that I learned in that experience was the way in which MoMA proselytized for modern art under the leadership of Alfred Barr, and sending out and loaning out exhibitions to Grand Rapids, Missouri, and Lawrence, Kansas, and all of these museums that learned about what we now consider the canon of modern art through the activism and uh, I would say and the evangelism of New York curators. We also were able to put a billboard outside of the MFA Boston that said, where do we go from here?" Quoting the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said in his final speech, "Where do we go from here? Chaos or community?" These are places that I find very important. As at Four Freedoms, we believe that there is an incredible nexus between art, education, commerce, and politics that is always at play, because the people who have the income to influence politics also have the income to influence and shape art. And a lot of that comes through their relationship to commerce. And education, of course. And so I believe that not only are the museums catalysts and crucibles, I believe that they do change the world. I believe that you all are incredibly powerful people, and I just gave you just a few examples, a way in which I think that work that has happened under your tenure has changed the lives of several million people. Uh, I can't tell you what it was like for me as a young Black man growing up in the Upper West Side of New York, going to the Met and seeing virtually no images in the 1980s of African Americans. And there's one problem I still have with the Met, which is that Egypt is not considered part of Africa. We can talk about that later. But that is, to be, an activist position. That in the way that art history is told, we don't actually create a continuity between the work that took place in Africa 2,000, 5,000 years ago and what's happening today. And so I think that that is, and I think it's also true. And I agree. I agree with all of what you said. I just disagree with what you think is the responsibility. I believe that the ambitious mission of sustaining meaningful change in museums, which you all have overseen over the past several years, is a profound, permanent, and perpetual goal, which should be at the core of any political agenda. And I know this is like the best time to be a white man running a museum, but and so I just want to say that I acknowledge that you all have kind of done so much prior to the heat, and I'm sure that now that the heat is on, that you're also thinking more. So thank you all for your work. Thank you, everyone, for having me, and thank you for your work.